G'day, Jack Doohan told us about receiving death threats. Zak Brown's chief of staff shared her dislike of Zak biting his nails, and George confirmed the first batch smelled like semen. This is Drive to Survive, Season 8, behind the scenes. I binged-watched all 8 episodes of the latest series of Drive to Survive. I liked it. Up front, it just shows me so much. And I work in the sport, so I figure if you don't work in the sport, this is going to be a real eye-opener for you. Ratings-wise, last year and year before, I'll go into that a little later in the video. But first up, though, in this series, Jack Doohan speaks frankly about receiving death threats around the Miami Grand Prix in particular. Now, I've spoken with Jack at length about this. I haven't done too much about it because he was always keen to keep it low-key. But now that he's come out and told effectively the world, it was pretty sad. Through no fault of his own, he copped a whole lot of angst. And when you watch the series, I think you too will feel for him. One time in Miami, he was out at dinner with his associates and family and had to end his meal and get back to the hotel quickly because the threat was tangible. And in a sport like Formula One, you wouldn't have thought that this sort of thing has a place. And for a fella in his early 20s, that is a lot of pressure to put on him. Any driver would feel the pressure. Kimi felt the pressure when he copped all that social media abuse for that, what was deemed at the time to be him pulling over for Lando in the second last race, which turned out not to be the case. It was just a simple error. But once again, the ugly side of social media raised its head, but it was dealt with well on Drive to Survive. And I should add that those threats came from a small number of people. When you have millions of fans and maybe 50 or 100 get a bit overzealous or out of line, they tend to get a lot of the attention. If you're wondering how the documentary is shot, this is an example of crews that wander the paddock. Some races there might be 2, 3, sometimes even 4 if it's a big race, always consisting of a cameraman, an audio guy and a producer. That vision is then sifted through, and there's many hours of it back at their editing base. They have a producer for each episode. They meet regularly to make sure that episodes don't contain the same information. And if you're wondering why it doesn't get aired straight after a race, well, that's all part of the deal with Formula One. Because the likes of Sky, Canal Plus, all of the TV broadcasters pay such big money, those broadcasters don't want competition, whereas taking all that vision, compiling it into this year 8 episodes and playing it prior to the start of the next season is not seen as competition. And what it does do is drive excitement up prior to the first race of the season, which is Melbourne on March 8. You will note when you watch this, there are no interviews with Max Verstappen, Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton, and Esteban Ocon. I'm pretty sure Esteban would have been up for an interview, or perhaps they interviewed him and then just didn't make the cut, but I'm understanding that the top 3, Lewis, Max, and Fernando, weren't interested. Of course, you never know when the cameras are around you, and that was driven home in one episode where a camera on the pit wall was focused on Zak Brown, and McLaren's communication manager came up behind to have a chat with Zak and had to remind Zak that, hey, they are recording. Obviously, Netflix don't want people to be acutely aware that they are recording, and there are a couple of instances in this series where you'll find drivers or their management, sometimes their trainer, saying, no more video. And as a rule, Netflix normally acquiesces to those demands. But otherwise, whatever they shoot, they have the right to air. Now, all team principals are given a cut of the episodes where they appear in, and whilst they can effectively lodge a protest, I'm not sure that Netflix has ever gone back and said, right, we'll take that out. I mentioned in the opener that Zak Brown's chief of staff shared her dislike of Zak biting his nails. It's the first I'd heard that Zak was guilty of that. But of course he is in a very high pressure situation, but tends to love the camera, as did Christian Horner, although Christian left halfway through the year, as you'll well remember. But I was most interested to hear Christian read out the message he received from Toto when Toto realised that Christian had been sacked. I won't go into the details. You go and have a listen for yourself. One thing that often gets mentioned are the interviews with Will Buxton. I think you have to realise that Will is there to link certain scenes together, and he has to be dramatic in his comments. And I know there are a number of memes around having a crack at Will for some obvious stuff that he says. I think they have him do that because they have a lot of first-time people watching this show who wouldn't be familiar with qualifying formats, how F1 works in general, so they use Will to colour in those shaded areas. One driver who certainly excels in this series is George Russell. He's featured quite a bit. Ladies, and perhaps men, I don't know, you'll be pleasantly surprised to see him shirtless in an episode, and that's where the rather controversial comment, "the first batch smelled like semen," pops up. I won't tell you what that's about, but I did replay that quote 3 times to make sure I heard it correctly. And in my Instagram post about that comment, there were many comments. So it certainly grabbed your attention. This is season 8, but if we go back to the very first season, only 280,000 people watched that, but by season 5, that had more than doubled to 570,000, and viewership hours totaled more than 90 million globally. In season 5, it was Netflix's most watched sports title during that year, and even now, despite the fact that figures for seasons 6 and 7 have come off a little bit, it is still one of their most popular series. Does it have a place going forward? Yeah, I think so. You're not compelled to watch it, and if Netflix want to go and invest the money and the time in producing it, there will always be an audience for it. What I love is the condensing of a race into just the highlights. It's action-packed. Yes, there are sound effects added, but does it give punters an unreal expectation that they're going to watch a race and see action every few laps? Maybe it does. Once they've watched a few, they'll realise that typically Formula One is procession-like instead of argy-bargy, bang-em-up, overtakes everywhere. Although that may be different this year. We don't know yet. You see a lot of studio interviews in the series, and typically what the Netflix crew do is hire a hotel room or a function room at a race weekend, and they request the drivers pop up and see them, but occasionally they go and visit their homes, like Christian Horner's stable, where they set up a studio to talk to Christian after he was let go by the team. It was an interesting first-hand experience of how he felt afterwards, and we got to see his wife's reaction as well. But one thing's for sure, I think the sport misses Christian's enthusiasm, his sparring with Toto Wolff, his confidence and his presence at the track. I don't think we've seen the end of him, and I've said this a couple of times. I did think he'd be back with Formula One by now. I did happen to note that his speeches here in Australia that he was planning on doing prior to the first race and between Australia and China have all been moved back to the summer break. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe we'll find out at some point. Jonathan Wheatley comes up well on this documentary, and one thing that stood out to me is his two-handed toothbrushing method. I've never seen this before. I guess it saves him time. I'll be very keen to see your comments below if you've seen it. Maybe you'll even try it and see whether it's a strategy you might consider. I've never considered it, but I may have a go. And still with bathrooms, have a look at Lando Norris towards the end of the series. Shaving. I don't think he's using a Gillette or a triple blade razor. I think he's using an old style single blade. Classy. Now, mid last year, there was a big furore about Sky Channel's incessant crossing to the girlfriends and wives and mums, for that matter, while races were going. Now, you'll find a lot of cuts back to Rebecca Donaldson, Alexandra, family and friends during this documentary series. Now, will Netflix Drive to Survive cop it like Sky did in the comments last year? And to be perfectly frank, does it really matter? Hey, thank you to those people who contacted me when the series came out and actually alerted me the fact that it was up for viewing, saying, look, we spotted you. Yes, a couple of times. With a speaking part, indeed.
Yeah, right. Welcome back. You're the man of the moment.
In episode 3, we get a very real look at Lando Norris, and I love Lando for his honesty. A lot of people in sport think that that might be a weakness, because you wouldn't see that from Max. But no, I quite like the fact that he often says what he thinks, and he's not afraid to show his softer, vulnerable side. I don't think we see that from Max. When things get a bit tight for Max, he tends to close up shop and be rather short with his answers, and you see a couple of examples of that in press conferences in the 2025 season. Another thing that struck me, Kimi Antonelli admitting that he had a lot of marketing days lined up with Mercedes last year, and by a lot, I'm talking 42 of them. That's a tremendous workload. That's, 6 full weeks in a very busy year for a teenager. He was actually telling Lewis about it at the time, and I think Lewis was a little bit gobsmacked. There's no way Lewis Hamilton would be doing 42 days of marketing activities. But Kimi's a junior driver. He's not in any position to be negotiating on that sort of thing, and drivers in their early years certainly have to do more work than they will as they become more successful. Another area that Sky Sports and Canal Plus and all the broadcasters don't get access to is private flights, and you'll see in this series that Netflix joined drivers on numerous private flights, both in jets and on helicopters. That tends to give us normal folk who don't fly private every second week a real insight into what it's like being an F1 driver. Yes, it is a lot of travel, But if you can do it comfortably, like these guys do, it puts a lot of hours back into your week. At this point, let me remind you, if you're a fan of my travel content on YouTube, I've moved it to a separate channel. It's called Kym Illman Travel. There's a link in the description below. So don't expect to see any more travel stuff on my YouTube channel. That'll all go over to that channel. So please, when you finish watching this video, if you like my travel stuff, and it includes hotels, flights, car rentals, restaurants, the whole box and dice, head over there afterwards and subscribe so you don't miss out. What this series does better than what television can or would even bother doing is showing the real emotional side of the drivers. And one of the best examples of that is getting inside Liam Lawson's head when he was demoted back to V-Carb. It's a pretty sad thing for these young fellas. They get the opportunity of their life, and they get 2 races racing for a world-class team, and then suddenly they're back to a B-grade team, and their demotion is played out in front of tens of millions of people. But do people actually come to the sport because of Drive to Survive? Well, certainly some do. As to what level of number is debatable, but more than half of F1 fans said that the series played a role in them becoming a fan, including 30% who said it was a major reason. And nearly 3/4 of those under the age of 45 attributed their fandom, at least in part, to Drive to Survive. It is a very powerful marketing tool for Formula One. Now, the mob behind this production is Box to Box Films. You might have seen some of their other documentaries, the golf one, surfing, but Drive to Survive is their big winner. And can we expect them back in the paddock in 2026? Well, they were in the paddock at testing, so I think that's a pretty good indication that we'll be heading for Season 9, which will come out a week before the season starts next year. And I don't believe that season will be starting in Australia. My understanding is it's going back to Bahrain for the season opener. And that'll mean about 1/4 of the attendees than we get to the Australian race, which kicks off next week. When you're listening to the commentary, know that that's not exactly verbatim from the telecast. They will re-record that audio so that it fits in with their shortened clips that they're running. What about sound effects? Yes, they're used liberally, mainly with stuff on track, in particular with collisions, to add a bit more drama to it. And with regards to that audio engineer, he or she will pick up on quite a few stories and stuff that could be quite beneficial to other teams. So those working on the series and being privy to all this information have to be very careful in how they use it, because if they're found to be at fault and another team getting an advantage from perhaps information that they've heard and shared, that could be the end of the series. One person we really miss on Drive to Survive is this man. Boy, weren't his outbursts colourful, honest and funny with his accent.
He does not fox smash my door.
Guenther is still in the paddock, but obviously not as a team principal. He's doing TV commentary work now. Could that be a reason for the decline in viewer numbers? No Guenther Steiner? Perhaps. I miss him. Maybe you do too. Going back to the early 20s, we would see Netflix do a video launch at tracks. Now, they didn't do one at Bahrain. There was a shoot, a driver's photo shoot, but in the past, we've seen them set up on the Bahrain Straight with all the cars, and then they have the TV camera walking down through that. That didn't happen this year, so you won't see that in next year's series, and obviously there's nothing in this year's series done from last year. My personal favourite episode in this series is the Las Vegas episode for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the colours for the filming of it, the aerial shots, the spectacle. It's a really beautifully produced episode. But the second part is the fact that that was the race where Lando and Oscar were both disqualified. And we got to hear a little bit more about what happened on that night, a bit more of the inside emotion from the team principal and the CEO. At the time, we didn't get any of that. I was stationed out the front of McLaren for about 90 minutes waiting for an answer. And in the end, all we got was Andrea Stella walking back, commentless, heading back into the hospitality suite. And then that was the last we saw of him. So to get more background on it and more detail, I thought was intriguing. If you're heading to the Melbourne Grand Prix coming from Europe, perhaps, I would recommend you download all those series on your Netflix account and watch them on the plane. I think it will add to your anticipation for an exciting first race and what I think will turn out to be a bizarre F1 season in 2026, along with these new regulations and new cars, battery management and all the shenanigans that goes along with that. Now, before I leave you, could you please hit the like button. For those of you unsubscribed to this channel, you can remedy that straight away. And for those of you who love my travel content, please click on the link below, Kym Illman Travel, and make sure you're following me on that brand new channel where all of my travel gear will go up throughout the year. Thanks for watching. Stay passionate. Oh, that's my new thingo, that it fits in with. Shut up.